The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Fargo, Dakota Territory, 1883, as Cassandra Bennett clutched her mother's tattered blue dress to her chest, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged cheeks. The dress was all she had left of her mother and memories that seemed to fade a little more with each passing season. Cassandra stood outside the modest storefront of Fargo's only seamstress, hesitating with her hand on the weathered wooden door. At 19, she'd spent the last 3 years as the woman of the household after her mother succumbed to consumption, leaving her to care for her father, Frank Callahan, one of the most respected cattle ranchers in the territory. The blue dress had been her mother's wedding gown, and tomorrow was the anniversary of her parents' wedding day. Cassandra had found it in an old trunk, only to discover mice had gotten to it, leaving holes and tears in the delicate fabric. The bell above the door jingled as Cassandra pushed it open. The smell of cotton, wool, and lavender sachets filled her nostrils. "Hello?" she called, her voice small in the quiet shop. A rustling came from behind a curtain at the back, and a moment later, a young woman appeared. She couldn't have been more than 24 or 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and bright, intelligent eyes. "I'm sorry to keep you waiting," the woman said, dusting her hands on her apron. "I'm Florence Caldwell. This is my shop." "Cassandra Bennett," she replied, suddenly shy about her tear-stained face. I need help." Florence's gaze dropped to the blue fabric clutched in Cassandra's hands, and her expression softened. "What have you got there?" "It was my mother's," Cassandra said, her voice cracking. "Her wedding dress. I found it today, and it's ruined." Fresh tears threatened to spill over. Florence stepped closer, gently taking the dress from Cassandra's hands. She examined it with the practiced eye of someone who understood the value of such things not in dollars and cents, but in memories and heartache. "Your mother was Catherine Bennett, wasn't she? Frank Callahan's wife?" Cassandra nodded, surprised. "You knew her?" "I arrived in Fargo just before she passed. But everyone spoke highly of her. She was known for her kindness." Florence laid the dress carefully across her cutting table. "I see the damage. Mice, I'm guessing?" "Yes." Is there anything you can do?" Florence bit her lip, her fingers tracing the torn sections. "It'll take fine work. Very fine work. The fabric is delicate, and I'll need to match the color exactly for the patches." "When do you need it?" "I don't know. I wanted to wear it tomorrow. For their anniversary. To remember her." Cassandra's voice was barely above a whisper. Florence looked up, meeting Cassandra's tear-filled eyes. Something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or recognition of the grief that Cassandra carried. "Come back at dawn," Florence said. "I'll work through the night. I couldn't ask you to, you didn't ask. I offered." Florence's voice was gentle but firm. "Some things are worth staying up for." As Cassandra left the shop, the sun had fully set, leaving Fargo bathed in the blue light of dusk. She hurried home, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Frank Callahan was sitting on the porch of their modest 2-story home at the edge of town when she returned. At 45, her father was still a handsome man, though grief had etched lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when her mother was alive. His eyes brightened when he saw her. "Where've you been, Cassie?" "I was starting to worry. I went to the seamstress in town." "Florence Caldwell." Frank's brow furrowed. "The new girl? The one who took over old Mrs. Peterson's shop?" "Yes. I found Mother's blue dress, the one she was married in. It's damaged, but Miss Caldwell said she could repair it." Her father's face softened. "You remembered. Tomorrow would have been our 20th anniversary." Cassandra sat beside him on the porch step. "I miss her, Pa." Frank put his arm around her shoulders. "Me too, darlin'. Every day." That night, as Cassandra lay in her bed, she thought about Florence Caldwell. There was something about the seamstress that intrigued her, a quiet strength, perhaps. or the way she'd understood without explanation why the dress mattered so much. She drifted to sleep wondering what Florence's story was and how she'd come to Fargo alone. Meanwhile, across town, Florence lit another candle in her small workroom behind the shop. She lived in the rooms above the store, having purchased the business from Mrs. Peterson 6 months earlier with money she'd saved working as a seamstress in Chicago. Fargo was growing fast, and she'd seen an opportunity to have her own business, something that would have been much harder in a larger city. She spread Catherine Bennett's wedding dress carefully on her work table. The dress was beautiful pale blue silk with delicate embroidery along the bodice. The mice had done their damage, but Florence had seen worse. She had spools of silk thread in various shades, and by holding them up to the candlelight, she found one that matched almost perfectly. As she worked, Florence thought about Cassandra Bennett. Everyone in town knew of Frank Callahan, of course. He was one of the wealthiest ranchers in the area, with a spread that employed a dozen men. But Florence had never met his daughter before. She'd seen her from a distance at church or in town, but they'd never spoken. The candlelight flickered as the night grew deeper. Florence's fingers moved deftly, pulling the thread through the delicate fabric, closing tears and reinforcing weak spots. She'd promised to have it done by dawn, and she would keep that promise, even if it meant no sleep. The town clock struck midnight, then 1, then 2. Florence's eyes grew heavy, but she persisted, thinking of the look on Cassandra's face when she'd brought in the dress. Such raw grief, even after 3 years. Florence knew something about grief herself. She'd left Chicago after losing her parents to influenza, wanting to start fresh somewhere new, somewhere the memories didn't lurk around every corner. Dawn was breaking when Florence set the last stitch and snipped the thread. She held up the dress, turning it in the golden light of morning. The repairs were nearly invisible, only someone looking closely would notice the subtle patchwork. She pressed the dress carefully, then folded it and wrapped it in brown paper and string. Just as she finished, the bell over the shop door jingled. Cassandra stood there, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face flushed from hurrying. "I'm sorry, I couldn't wait any longer." Florence smiled, suddenly aware of her own disheveled appearance after the sleepless night. "It's ready." She handed the package to Cassandra, who took it with trembling hands. Carefully, she unwrapped the brown paper and unfolded the dress. The morning light through the shop windows caught the blue silk, making it shimmer. "Oh," Cassandra breathed, tears filling her eyes again. It's perfect. You can barely see where it was torn." She looked up at Florence, her expression a mixture of gratitude and wonder. "You did this all night?" Florence nodded, too tired to deny it. "It was important. How much do I owe you?" Cassandra asked, reaching for the small purse at her waist. Florence shook her head. "Nothing. But I must pay you something. You worked all night, consider it a gift. In memory of your mother." Cassandra stared at her, clearly at a loss for words. Then, impulsively, she stepped forward and hugged Florence. The embrace startled the seamstress, but after a moment, she returned it. "Thank you," Cassandra whispered. "I don't know how to thank you enough." "Wear it proudly today," Florence said as they separated. "That's all the thanks I need." Cassandra nodded, carefully folding the dress again. Will you be at the social tonight? At the church?" Florence hesitated. She hadn't planned on going. Large gatherings still made her uncomfortable in this new town where she knew so few people. "I hadn't thought about it. You should come. I'd like to introduce you to my father properly. He'd want to thank you too." Florence found herself nodding. "Perhaps I will then." After Cassandra left, Florence climbed the stairs to her small apartment above the shop. She was exhausted, her eyes burning from the strain of fine stitching by candlelight. She fell onto her bed fully clothed and was asleep within moments. She dreamed of blue silk and candlelight, of a girl with tears in her eyes, and strangely, of Frank Callahan, a man she'd seen but never spoken to, standing tall and handsome at the church social. Cassandra returned home with the dress held carefully against her chest. The ranch was already busy with the day's work, cowhands moving about the property, the smell of breakfast wafting from the cookhouse. Their home was modest for a man of her father's means, but Frank had never seen the need for ostentation. What he earned went back into the land, the cattle, and the men who worked for him. Her father was in his study when she entered, going over ledgers. He looked up as she came in, his face lighting up when he saw what she carried. "Is that it?" he asked, setting aside his pen. "Yes. Miss Caldwell fixed it. Look, Pa, you can hardly tell it was damaged." She held up the dress for his inspection. Frank rose from his desk and came closer, his fingers lightly touching the blue silk. "Your mother was the most beautiful bride in the territory," he said softly. "She saved for months to buy the silk for this dress. Insisted on blue instead of white. Said blue was the color of the prairie sky, and that's where she felt closest to heaven." Cassandra had heard the story before, but she never tired of it. "I'm going to wear it today. For her. And I invited Miss Caldwell to the social tonight. I hope that's all right." Frank nodded absently, still lost in memories. "Of course. That's kind of you. She's new in town, isn't she? Probably doesn't know many folks yet. She worked all night to fix the dress. Pa wouldn't take any payment." This got Frank's full attention. "All night? And refused payment?" He frowned. "That's not right. We'll make sure she's compensated properly. She said to consider it a gift in Mother's memory." "Did she know your mother?" "No, but she said everyone spoke highly of her." Frank's expression softened. "Your mother had that effect on people. Even those who never met her seemed to love her." He squeezed Cassandra's shoulder. "Go on, then. Try on the dress. Let's see if it fits." Cassandra hurried to her room, excited to see how the dress would look. It had been made for her mother, who had been slighter than Cassandra, but not by much. She slipped out of her simple cotton dress and carefully stepped into the blue silk. It fit remarkably well. A bit snug across the bust and loose at the waist, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with a sash. She twisted her hair up in a simple knot, and studied her reflection in the small mirror on her dresser. For a moment she could see her mother and herself, the same curve of cheek, the same determined set of the jaw. The dress made the resemblance even more striking. There was a knock at her door. "Can I see?" her father called. She opened the door, suddenly shy under his scrutiny. Frank's eyes widened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. "You look just like her," he finally managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like her on our wedding day." Cassandra smiled through the tears that threatened again. "Then I've done what I wanted to do. I've brought her back for today." Frank pulled her into a hug, careful not to crumple the dress. "She'd be so proud of you, Cassie. So proud of the woman you've become." They spent the day quietly, visiting Catherine's grave on the hill overlooking the ranch, leaving wild flowers gathered from the prairie. Frank told stories Cassandra had heard before, but she listened as if they were new, storing away every detail about her mother. As evening approached, Cassandra changed out of the blue dress, carefully hanging it in her wardrobe. For the social, she chose a simpler dress of green calico, tying her hair back with a matching ribbon. Frank was waiting for her by the wagon, dressed in his Sunday best. "Ready?" he asked as she approached. "Yes. Do you think Miss Caldwell will come?" "We'll find out soon enough." The church social was already in full swing when they arrived. Lanterns hung from the rafters of the church hall, casting a warm glow over the gathered townspeople. A small band played in one corner, and tables laden with food lined one wall. Cassandra scanned the crowd, looking for Florence. She spotted her standing somewhat awkwardly near the entrance, wearing a simple brown dress that did little to flatter her. Yet there was something striking about her all the same, a quiet dignity, perhaps. "There she is," Cassandra said to her father, taking his arm and guiding him through the crowd. Florence saw them approaching and straightened, smoothing her skirts nervously. "Miss Caldwell," Cassandra said warmly. "You came." "I said I might," Florence replied with a small smile. Miss Caldwell, this is my father, Frank Callahan. Pa, this is Florence Caldwell, the seamstress who saved Mother's dress. Frank extended his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you properly, Miss Caldwell. My daughter tells me I owe you a debt of gratitude. Florence took his hand briefly. Not at all, Mr. Callahan. It was my honor to help. Nonsense. You worked through the night and refused payment. That deserves recognition. Frank's tone was kind but firm. I insist you join us for Sunday dinner tomorrow. Consider it a small token of our appreciation. Florence looked startled by the invitation. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition. Cassandra cut in. Please say yes. I'd like to get to know you better. Florence hesitated, then nodded. In that case, I accept. Thank you. The band struck up a lively tune, and couples began to form for a dance. Do you dance, Miss Caldwell? Frank asked. Florence shook her head. Not in a very long time, I'm afraid. That's a shame, Frank said, his eyes twinkling. I was hoping you might save a dance for an old cowboy. Cassandra watched in surprise as a blush crept up Florence's neck. Perhaps another time, Florence said quietly. Just then, a young man approached and asked Cassandra to dance. She glanced at her father, who nodded his permission, and allowed herself to be led to the dance floor. From across the room, she watched her father and Florence talking. There was something in the way her father leaned slightly toward the seamstress, the way he seemed to hang on her every word, that made Cassandra pause. She hadn't seen her father show interest in any woman since her mother's death. The thought was both unsettling and oddly comforting. Her father deserved happiness, didn't he? And Florence seemed like a good person. Still, the idea of anyone taking her mother's place, even slightly, made her heart ache. The dance ended, and Cassandra made her way back to where her father and Florence still stood deep in conversation. And that's how I ended up in Fargo, Florence was saying. A fresh start. We all need those sometimes, Frank replied, his voice gentle. Cassandra rejoined them, slightly out of breath from the dance. What did I miss? Miss Caldwell was just telling me how she came to Fargo, Frank explained. She's originally from Chicago. A big city girl, Cassandra said with a smile. What made you choose our little town? It didn't feel so little when I arrived, Florence said. The Dakota Territory is growing fast. And Fargo needed a seamstress after Mrs. Peterson decided to retire. It seemed like fate. Well, I'm glad fate brought you here, Cassandra said sincerely. Otherwise, who would have saved my mother's dress? The evening continued pleasantly. Florence gradually relaxed, even accepting a dance with Mr. Turner, the banker, though she declined when Frank asked again. Cassandra noticed her father watching Florence throughout the evening, his expression thoughtful. As they said their goodbyes at the end of the night, Frank reminded Florence about Sunday dinner. We eat at 2. I'll send the wagon for you around 1:30. That's not necessary, Florence protested. I can walk, it's 5 miles to the ranch, Frank said firmly. I insist. Florence finally agreed, and they parted ways. On the ride home, Cassandra was quiet, thinking about the evening. Finally she spoke. You seem to like Miss Caldwell. Frank glanced at her, then back at the road. She seems like a fine woman. Hard-working. Independent. She's pretty too. Frank's hands tightened slightly on the reins. I suppose she is, in her way. It's all right, Pa. If you think so, I mean. He sighed. Cassie, I don't want you thinking. I know nobody could replace Mother. I'm not saying that. I want you to be happy. Frank was silent for a long moment. Your mother was the love of my life. But she's been gone 3 years now. I've been lonely. I won't deny that. Cassandra reached over and squeezed his arm. I understand. Do you? Because nothing's going to happen if you're not comfortable with it. Let's just get to know Miss Caldwell better, Cassandra said carefully. See what happens naturally. Frank nodded, and they rode the rest of the way in companionable silence. Sunday dawned bright and clear. The ranch was quiet, as was tradition on the Lord's Day. Most of the hands had the day off, save for those needed for essential care of the animals. Cassandra spent the morning helping their housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, prepare for dinner. They roasted a chicken, prepared vegetables from the kitchen garden, and baked fresh bread. The aroma filled the house, reminding Cassandra of Sundays when her mother was alive. At 1:30 precisely, the sound of wheels on gravel announced the arrival of the wagon. Cassandra looked out the window to see her father helping Florence down from the seat. Florence had dressed carefully for the occasion in a blue dress that was simple but flattering. She carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. Cassandra hurried to the door to greet her. "Welcome to our home, Miss Caldwell." "Thank you for having me," Florence replied, handing her the package. "A small gift. Ginger snaps. I baked them this morning." "How thoughtful. We'll have them with coffee after dinner." Frank led Florence into the parlor while Cassandra took the cookies to the kitchen. When she returned, she found her father showing Florence the family photographs on the mantel. "This was taken on our wedding day," Frank was saying, pointing to a framed image of himself and Catherine. "And this one when Cassie was born." Florence studied the photographs with interest. "You can see where Cassandra gets her smile," she observed. "She has your eyes, though." "That's what Catherine always said," Frank agreed. "Said she was glad of it, since my eyes were what first attracted her to me." "They're very expressive eyes," Florence said, then blushed as if she'd said too much. Cassandra cleared her throat. "Dinner's almost ready. Would you like to see the rest of the house before we eat, Miss Caldwell?" "I'd love to, and please call me Florence. Miss Caldwell makes me feel like a schoolteacher." Cassandra showed Florence through the house, the study where her father did his business, the small library filled with her mother's beloved books, and finally, her own bedroom. "This is lovely," Florence said, admiring the quilt on Cassandra's bed. "Did your mother make this?" "Yes. She was an accomplished quilter. She taught me the basics, but I never had her patience for it." Florence ran her fingers over the tiny, even stitches. "She was very talented. She would have liked you," Cassandra said suddenly. "She valued skill and hard work. And kindness." Florence looked touched. "That's a lovely thing to say." A call from downstairs indicated dinner was ready. They joined Frank at the dining table, where Mrs. Abernathy was laying out the food. The meal was pleasant, the conversation flowing easily. Florence spoke about her life in Chicago, where she'd worked in a dress shop catering to wealthy ladies. Frank talked about his early days in the territory, arriving with nothing but a few cattle and big dreams. "And you, Cassandra?" Florence asked. "What are your dreams?" Cassandra hesitated. It wasn't a question she was often asked. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "For a long time, it was just about keeping things going after Mother died. Taking care of Pa and the house. But surely you have dreams of your own?" Florence pressed gently. "A young woman your age must think about the future. I suppose I'd like to marry someday. Have children." Cassandra twisted her napkin in her lap. "But I also love the ranch. I know the business almost as well as Pa does now. I've been helping with the books since I was 15. Frank looked at his daughter with pride. "She has a better head for figures than I do. Knows every cow by sight, too, just like a proper rancher." "That's impressive," Florence said sincerely. "Not many young women are allowed such responsibility. Catherine and I always believed in educating our daughter properly," Frank said. "No reason a girl can't learn the same things as a boy." After dinner, they had coffee and Florence's ginger snaps in the parlor. The cookies were perfectly spiced, crisp on the outside and slightly chewy in the center. "These are wonderful," Cassandra exclaimed. "Where did you learn to bake like this?" "My mother taught me," Florence replied. "She was a baker's daughter. Said a woman should know how to cook even if she never needed to." Wise woman, Frank commented, reaching for another cookie. These remind me of ones Catherine used to make at Christmas. I'd be happy to share the recipe, Florence offered. The afternoon passed quickly. Frank showed Florence around the immediate property, the barn, the kitchen garden, and the small orchard Catherine had insisted on planting when they first settled. From the hill behind the house, they could see across the vast expanse of the ranch, cattle grazing in the distance. It's beautiful, Florence said, shading her eyes against the sun. So different from the city. It grows on you, Frank replied. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else now. As the sun began to lower in the sky, it was time for Florence to return to town. Frank insisted on driving her himself. Would you mind if I came along, Pa? Cassandra asked. Not at all. Get your shawl. The evenings are still cool. The three of them rode back to town, the setting sun painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Florence sat between Frank and Cassandra on the wagon seat, her shoulder occasionally brushing against Frank's as the wagon hit a bump in the road. When they reached Florence's shop, Frank helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering on hers perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for a lovely day, Florence said. It's been a long time since I enjoyed such hospitality. The pleasure was ours, Frank assured her. I hope you'll join us again. I'd like that. Cassandra leaned down from the wagon. Perhaps you could teach me some of your sewing techniques sometime? I'm adequate with a needle, but nothing like you. Florence's face lit up. I'd be delighted. Come by the shop any time. As they drove away, Cassandra glanced at her father. He was watching Florence enter her shop, a slight smile on his face. You really do like her, Cassandra observed. Frank didn't deny it. She's a remarkable woman. Strong. Been through hardship but hasn't let it embitter her. He looked at his daughter. But nothing will happen if you're not comfortable with it, Cassie. I mean that. Cassandra considered her feelings carefully. There was still a twinge of pain at the thought of her father with someone other than her mother, but it was fainter now. And she genuinely liked Florence. I think Mother would want you to be happy, she finally said. And I think Florence might make you happy. Frank reached over and squeezed her hand. Thank you, darlin'. That means the world to me. In the weeks that followed, Florence became a regular visitor to the Callahan ranch. Sometimes Frank would bring her out for Sunday dinner, other times Cassandra would visit Florence's shop for sewing lessons. The three of them fell into an easy friendship, though Cassandra couldn't help noticing the way her father's eyes followed Florence, or how Florence's cheeks flushed whenever Frank entered the room. Spring turned to summer, and Fargo grew busier as travelers and new settlers passed through. Florence's business thrived, especially after word spread about how she had restored Catherine Bennett's dress. Women came from miles around to have her mend treasured garments, or create new ones. One hot July afternoon, Cassandra entered Florence's shop to find her struggling with a large bolt of fabric. Let me help you with that, Cassandra said, rushing forward to catch the other end before it hit the floor. Thank you, Florence said gratefully. It just came in on the morning stage. Mrs. Harrison ordered it for her daughter's wedding dress. They maneuvered the heavy bolt onto the cutting table. It's beautiful, Cassandra commented, running her fingers over the ivory satin. She'll make a lovely bride. Yes, she will. Florence began measuring and marking the fabric. How is your father? I haven't seen him in town this week. He's fine. Busy with the summer roundup. He asked after you, though. Florence's hand stilled momentarily. Did he? He always does. Cassandra watched Florence's face carefully. He cares for you, you know. Florence looked up, her cheeks pink. Cassandra, it's all right. I know. And I'm glad. Florence set down her scissors. Are you? Truly? Because I would never want to come between you and your father, or disrespect your mother's memory. My mother would have liked you, Cassandra said firmly. And so do I. You've become a dear friend to me, Florence. And I've seen how happy my father is when you're around. Florence's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Your father is a good man. One of the best I've ever known. But I've been cautious. I lost so much in Chicago. My parents, my security. Starting over here was frightening but necessary. And now? Are you still afraid? Less so, Florence admitted. Fargo feels like home now. And you and your father. You've become important to me. Cassandra smiled. Good. Because I think he's working up the courage to court you properly. He even asked Mrs. Abernathy to press his good suit yesterday. Florence laughed, wiping away a tear that had escaped. Did he really? He did. And he's been practicing his speech to you when he thinks no one can hear. Something about admiration and deepest regard. Oh dear, Florence said, covering her mouth. Now I'll have to pretend to be surprised. Please do. He's been very nervous about it. They laughed together, and Cassandra felt a warmth in her chest. This was right, she decided. This was how moving forward should feel, not forgetting the past, but making room for new joy. That evening, Frank arrived at Florence's shop just as she was closing up. He was dressed in his Sunday best, his hair slicked back with pomade, a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. Miss Caldwell, he said, removing his hat. I was hoping I might have a word. Florence pretended not to notice his formal attire or the flowers. Of course, Mr. Callahan. Would you like to come in? Frank followed her into the shop, suddenly tongue-tied despite all his practice. Is everything all right? Florence prompted gently. Yes, that is. He thrust the flowers toward her. These are for you. Florence took them, her fingers brushing his. They're lovely. Thank you. Frank cleared his throat. Miss Caldwell, Florence, I've been wanting to speak to you about something important. I find myself thinking about you often. Very often, in fact. And I was wondering if you might allow me to call on you formally. With your permission, of course. Florence's eyes sparkled with barely contained amusement and genuine pleasure. Are you asking to court me, Mr. Callahan? I am, Frank said, relieved that she'd cut to the heart of the matter. I hold you in the highest esteem, and my feelings have grown beyond mere friendship. I understand if you need time to consider. I don't. Florence interrupted. I accept. Frank blinked. You do? Yes. She stepped closer to him. I've grown very fond of you, Frank. And of Cassandra. I would be honored to receive your attentions. Frank's face split into a wide grin. Well, that's wonderful news. Florence smiled up at him. Cassandra mentioned you might be calling today. She approves, in case you were wondering. Frank chuckled. That girl never could keep a secret. But yes, I spoke with her first. I wouldn't proceed without her blessing. You're a good father, Florence said softly. And a good man. Frank reached for her hand, and she gave it willingly. May I call on you tomorrow evening? Perhaps we could take a walk? I'd like that very much. As Frank left the shop, his step was lighter than it had been in years. Florence watched him go, clutching the wildflowers to her chest, her heart full of hope for the first time since leaving Chicago. The courtship of Frank Callahan and Florence Caldwell was the talk of Fargo that summer. They were seen walking together in the evenings, attending church side by side, and sharing ice cream at the town social. Frank would ride into town several times a week, always stopping at the seamstress's shop with some small gift, wildflowers, a book he thought she might enjoy, or fresh produce from the ranch. Cassandra watched their relationship blossom with a mixture of emotions. There was still an occasional pang when she saw her father smile at Florence in a way he'd once smiled at her mother. But mostly, she felt glad to see him happy again, to see the years of grief lifting from his shoulders. Her own relationship with Florence deepened as well. The seamstress taught her fine stitching techniques, shared stories of life in Chicago, and listened to Cassandra's dreams and worries with genuine interest. It was different from having a mother, but it filled a space in Cassandra's life that had been empty for too long. One evening in late August, as the three of them sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset, Frank cleared his throat nervously. "I have something I'd like to discuss with both of you," he said. Florence and Cassandra exchanged a glance. "What is it, Pa?" Cassandra asked. Frank took Florence's hand. "Florence, these past few months have been the happiest I've known in a long time. You've brought light back into my life, and I can't imagine going back to the way things were before." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I'm asking if you'll make me the happiest man in Dakota Territory and become my wife." Florence gasped as Frank opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Frank, before you answer," Frank said quickly, "I want you to know that Cassandra and I have discussed this, and she gives us her blessing. But I understand if you need time to think." "Yes," Florence said, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, I will marry you." Frank slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her hand reverently. Cassandra found herself crying too, happy tears that surprised her with their intensity. "Welcome to the family," she said, embracing Florence. "Officially, I mean." Florence hugged her back. "Thank you, Cassandra. Your blessing means everything to us." "When?" Cassandra asked, wiping away her tears. "When will the wedding be?" Frank and Florence looked at each other. "We were thinking October," Frank said. "Before the winter sets in. Nothing too elaborate. Just family and friends." "October is perfect," Cassandra agreed. "The cottonwoods will be golden then. It'll be beautiful." As the wedding plans progressed, Florence spent more time at the ranch. They decided she would move there after the wedding, and Frank had already begun adding a sewing room for her business. She would keep the shop in town but work from home more often. One afternoon, as Cassandra helped Florence sort through linens for her new home, she had a sudden thought. "Florence, what will you wear for the wedding?" Florence looked up from the stack of towels she was folding. "I haven't decided yet. Something simple, I think." "What about?" Cassandra hesitated, not sure if her idea was appropriate. "What about my mother's blue dress? The one you repaired?" Florence's eyes widened. "Oh, Cassandra, no. That's your mother's dress. It belongs to you." "It would mean a lot to me," Cassandra said softly, "to see it worn again, with love. And I know Pa would think it was fitting." "Are you certain?" "I am. We could alter it to fit you perfectly. Together." Florence's eyes filled with tears. "I would be honored. Truly honored." In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Cassandra and Florence worked on the blue dress together. They took it in at the waist, let it out slightly at the bust, and added delicate lace at the cuffs. Florence's subtle way of making the dress partly her own while honoring its history. The day of the wedding dawned clear and cool, with the promised golden leaves of the cottonwoods shimmering in the October sunlight. The ceremony would be held at the ranch, under an arch Frank had built especially for the occasion. Cassandra helped Florence dress in the blue silk, now restored to its original beauty and altered to fit its new wearer perfectly. "You look beautiful," Cassandra said, arranging Florence's auburn hair with white flowers. "Truly beautiful." Florence squeezed Cassandra's hand. "Thank you. For everything. For accepting me, for sharing your father, for this dress." Her voice broke slightly. "I promise I'll be good to him, Cassandra. And to you. I know you will." Cassandra hugged her carefully, mindful of the dress. "She would be happy about this, you know. My mother. She always said Pa deserved joy." There was a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Abernathy, coming to tell them it was time. The ceremony was simple but moving. Frank waited under the arch, looking handsome and nervous in his best suit. The guests' neighbors, friends, and ranch hands stood in the yard, which had been decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons. Cassandra walked ahead of Florence, carrying a small bouquet of prairie flowers. When Florence appeared in the blue silk dress, a collective murmur went through the gathered guests. Frank's eyes widened, then filled with tears as he recognized Catherine's dress, now worn by his bride-to-be. The minister spoke the traditional words, and Frank and Florence exchanged vows and rings. When they were pronounced husband and wife, Frank kissed Florence tenderly, and the guests erupted in cheers. The celebration continued into the evening, with music, dancing, and food served on tables set up in the yard. Cassandra watched her father and Florence during their first dance, saw the way they looked at each other, and felt a profound sense of rightness. Her mother would always be part of their family, her memory honored and cherished. But there was room in their hearts for Florence, too, room for new love, new memories, new beginnings. As the sun set on the Callahan ranch that day, painting the sky in the same shade of blue as Florence's wedding dress, Cassandra felt a sense of completion. The seamstress who had mended her mother's dress by candlelight had also, in her way, mended their family. The first year of Frank and Florence's marriage brought changes to the Callahan ranch. Florence's sewing room became the heart of her expanded business, with women from all over the territory coming to have dresses made or altered. She still kept the shop in town, hiring a young assistant to help on days when she worked from home. Frank's cattle business thrived, and he credited Florence's practical business sense for helping him make smarter investments. They complemented each other well, his boldness balanced by her caution, her creativity enhanced by his straightforward approach to problems. Cassandra found herself with more freedom to pursue her own interests. With Florence managing the household, Cassandra spent more time learning the ranching business from her father. She discovered she had a talent for breeding and began developing her own small herd of cattle with distinctive markings that became sought after by buyers. In the spring of 1885, Florence announced she was expecting a child. The news brought both joy and a resurgence of memories for Cassandra and Frank. They found themselves telling stories about Catherine, sharing her wisdom about childrearing, ensuring her presence would be felt by the new addition to the family. The baby, a boy they named Charles Franklin Callahan, was born on a snowy December morning. He had Frank's strong features but Florence's auburn hair, a perfect blending of his parents. "He's beautiful," Cassandra whispered, holding her baby brother for the first time. At 21, she never expected to become a big sister, but the tiny bundle in her arms awakened a fierce protectiveness in her. "He is," Florence agreed, tired but radiant in the bed. "Your father says he looks like you did as a baby." Cassandra looked up to find her father watching them, his expression one of quiet joy. "Is that true, Pa?" "The spitting image," Frank confirmed. "Same determined little chin. Same way of staring at everything like he's trying to figure it all out." As little Charlie grew, so did the bonds between the members of the Callahan family. Cassandra doted on her brother, teaching him to ride almost as soon as he could walk. Florence expanded her sewing business, gaining a reputation that spread beyond Dakota Territory. Frank's ranch became one of the most successful operations in the region. In the summer of 1887, as they celebrated Charlie's first birthday, Cassandra made an announcement of her own. "I've decided to accept Frederick Dawson's proposal," she told Frank and Florence after dinner, once Charlie had been put to bed. Frederick was the son of a neighboring rancher, a thoughtful young man of 24 who had been courting Cassandra for nearly a year. Frank and Florence exchanged a look. "Are you sure, Cassie?" Frank asked. "You're still young." "I'm 23, Pa, older than Mother was when she married you." Frank couldn't argue with that. "And you love him? Truly love him?" Cassandra's face softened. "I do. He's kind and hardworking. He makes me laugh. And he respects my ideas about ranching." "Then you have our blessing," Florence said, reaching for Frank's hand. "Though I imagine your father will have some conditions for young Mr. Dawson." Frank nodded seriously. "Starting with the fact that your herd stays yours, with your brand. I won't have all your hard work subsumed into the Dawson holdings." Cassandra laughed. "Frederick already agreed to that. He admires what I've built." She hesitated. "There's one more thing. I'd like to be married in Mother's blue dress. If that's all right." Florence smiled. I think that's a wonderful idea. It should stay in the family. So it was that in the autumn of 1887, for years after Florence had mended Catherine's dress by candlelight, Cassandra stood before a minister in the same blue silk, now carefully altered once again to fit her frame. Frederick waited for her under the same arch where Frank and Florence had exchanged their vows, looking at her with the same devotion Frank had shown both Catherine and Florence. Frank walked his daughter down the aisle, his chest tight with emotion. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered as they approached the arch. "So am I." Cassandra squeezed his arm. "Thank you, Pa, for everything." After the ceremony, as the celebration began, Cassandra found herself standing with Florence, watching as Frank bounced little Charlie on his knee while speaking with guests. "I never thanked you properly," Cassandra said. "For what?" Florence asked, puzzled. "For that night. When you mended Mother's dress by candlelight. You changed everything." Florence's eyes grew misty. "I simply did what needed doing." "No. You did more than that. You showed kindness to a stranger. You honored my mother's memory. And in doing so, you opened the door to all of this." Cassandra gestured at the gathering, at Frederick talking animatedly with his parents, at Charlie giggling in Frank's arms, at the friends and neighbors who had come to celebrate. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," Florence said softly. "You shared your father, your home, even your mother's dress. You made room for me in your life when you could have resented me. How could I resent someone who brought so much joy?" Cassandra hugged Florence tightly. "I got a stepmother, a brother, and kept my mother's memory alive through her dress. Some might call that a miracle. Some might indeed." Florence returned the embrace. "And now that dress has been worn by 3 women who loved the Callahan men with all their hearts. There's something beautiful in that." As the sun set on another wedding at the Callahan Ranch, the blue dress caught the golden light, shimmering like the Dakota sky. It had been torn and mended, altered and adjusted, but its essence remained a symbol of love that endured, adapted, and flourished through the generations. Just like the family who treasured it. Years passed, and the Callahan family continued to grow. Cassandra and Frederick built a house on adjoining land, combining their ranching operations while maintaining separate herds. They had 3 children of their own, 2 girls and a boy who grew up alongside Charlie, more like siblings than cousins. Florence's sewing business expanded into a proper dressmaking establishment in Fargo, employing several women and shipping orders as far as Minneapolis and Chicago. Frank's cattle operation became one of the largest in Dakota Territory, and when statehood came in 1889, he was asked to serve on various agricultural committees, helping to shape the new state's farming and ranching policies. Charlie grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's creative spirit and his father's steady determination. He showed little interest in ranching but developed a passion for building and design, eventually studying architecture in St. Paul before returning to help design Fargo's growing downtown. The blue silk dress remained a family treasure, carefully preserved in a cedar chest. When Charlie married in 1908, his bride wore it, continuing the tradition. Later, Cassandra's daughters took their turns, each adding a small embellishment, while keeping the dress essentially as it had been when Catherine Bennett first wore it. In 1915, as Frank Callahan approached his 77th birthday, he sat on the porch of the ranch house with Florence, watching their grandchildren and great-grandchildren play in the yard. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes were still bright and clear. "I've been thinking about Catherine's dress," he said to Florence, who was still elegant at 65, her auburn hair now streaked with silver. "What about it, dear?" Florence asked, looking up from her knitting. "It's brought so much luck to our family. Started with you mending it that night." Florence smiled at the memory. "By candlelight. My eyes were so strained the next day, I could barely thread a needle. Worth it, though?" Frank asked, taking her hand. "Worth every moment," she assured him, squeezing his fingers. "Look what came of it." They gazed out at their legacy, the children and grandchildren, the prosperous ranch, the community they'd helped build. From one blue dress, mended by candlelight, had grown a dynasty of love and perseverance. Worth every moment, Frank agreed, lifting her hand to his lips. Every single one.